Hello everyone. This is the fifth part of the story Game of Thrones, the Prideful one. Chapter 27. After my meeting with Varys, and our mutual agreement to help each other out, him because he wanted the best for the realm, and me because I was tired of the game, I took a couple days to cool off and organize my thoughts, before the imminent war started. I knew Varys was right. I knew before he even said it, my betrothal was as good as broken. The king had that kind of power, and Lord Stark, while probably not happy with this development, would do nothing to stop him. So much for honor, and to add a cherry over the top, Catelyn's love for me didn't help. She hated me, and wanted to get rid of my betrothal with Sansa, so the idea of her daughter being a queen in the future would sure sweeten the deal her. They are ready, Illyrio announced, letting me know the Targaryen siblings were ready to meet me. Very well, I nodded. I followed the Magister through his castle, while deep in thought. This time my marriage, if both parties agreed, would be immediate. I would have to sleep with her after the ceremony. She was older than Sansa by 2 or 3 years, being around me age, but unlike my time with Sansa, there would be no room for romance, or make her fall in love with me. I would have to do that after we married. Life finds a way to fuck with you. We are here. Illyrio woke me up from my train of thought, just in time to see the royal siblings standing in front of me. Daenerys and Viserys. Daenerys was a young woman in her early teens. Daenerys had the classical Valyrian look, with beautifully unique violet eyes, pale skin, and long, pale silver gold hair. She had a slender frame, with average-sized breasts. Daenerys, in other words, she was beautiful. Viserys, like his sister, had the classical Valyrian features, with pale skin, silver blonde hair, but instead of having purple eyes, he had pale lilac eyes. Viserys was the first one to approach, and I could already tell I would not like him in the least. He had that air while walking that said, "I'm superior to you in every way, and you should kneel." "A pleasure to meet you," Viserys said, expecting me to bow. Likewise, I nodded. I could practically hear him shout inside his head, because I didn't bow. "So we have things to discuss, right?" I said, taking a seat. Viserys nodded, gesturing to follow him. I ignored him and proceeded to introduce myself to the princess. "A pleasure to meet you, my lady." I kissed her hand, trying to make a good first impression. "The pleasure is mine, my lord." Daenerys smiled shyly. It was hard to imagine that in the original timeline she would grow to be quite the fearsome leader. Right now she was a shy, sheltered girl. With my introductions done, I followed Viserys, who wanted to kill me for ignoring him, to discuss our alliance. I didn't like to lie, but I could manipulate by omission. "As you know, I'm the rightful king of the 7 kingdoms, Viserys said in a matter-of-fact tone. If this wasn't a political meeting, I would have laughed at him, but for now I would indulge the king of nothing. "I heard," I nodded. "You can provide me an army, I can provide you a wife." Viserys sat down with a smug expression. "Seems like good trade, don't you think?" If I loved her, then yes, it would an equal exchange, but it wasn't. One woman for army was utterly ridiculous, but she did have her political advantages, that after Viserys died, as her husband I would have a claim to the Iron Throne, and more. "So you want my army, and you'll give me your sister?" I inquired. "Yes, that and for you to bend the knee," Viserys nodded. "We'll talk after the war." There was no way in hell I would kneel to him. Viserys shifted his position on the chair uncomfortably, not expecting opposition from me. "I'm your king." "Don't worry, I will give the Targaryens their rightful place in the throne," I chuckled, making him relaxed visibly, but he didn't read the underline of my comment. I said I would give a Targaryen the throne. I never said who. "Then let's prepare the wedding, so we can leave and take what's mine," Viserys said, not pushing the kneeling thing any longer. "We can't win, not with my army alone." I stopped his idiotic train of thought. "Are you going back to what we just agreed on?" Viserys inquired angrily. "I don't recall agreeing to anything. Is he really that desperate?" "But let's follow his train." "No, what I meant is I need a bigger army, and Essos can provide that." Viserys eyed me for a second before asking, "What do you plan to do?" "I plan to increase my numbers, only then taking the 7 kingdoms is plausible," I informed him, wondering how stupid he was. Not once in my conversation I said I would give him an army, yet he assumes so. "For now that will do." "I see, and how do you plan to increase our numbers?" Viserys asked. "By making a deal with the Dothraki," I smiled. Little did he know what I had planned. "Very well, I give you permission to proceed," Viserys said. and I had to control my urge to slap some sense into the entitled bastard, but the wedding must proceed, immediately. He really wants to see our alliance be sealed. Sadly, he didn't have much time ahead of him. Sadly, he wasn't going to be here to see his family back on the throne, well, me on the throne, but with his sister, which still counts. As you wish, I nodded. I never expected to marry Daenerys. I considered her a threat until the lion fucked my chill path over. Sansa Stark point of view. My betrothal was broken. It didn't matter how much I begged father or mother, they simply didn't care. I loved Ronard. I was to marry the prince. There was a time I wanted to marry the prince. Yes, he was handsome, but I didn't want him anymore. I wanted to be his lady, Lady Mormont. But there is nothing I can do. The king was the one to break it. There was nothing Ronard could do. Why life had to be so cruel with me. I'll miss him. He was so kind and nice with me, I said between tears as Jane tried to make me feel better. Maybe the prince will take your broken heart and mend it? Jane offered. It seemed I was destined like mother to marry without love, but unlike mother I loved beforehand. I loved him. Would I love another after my heart was already taken? I don't care. I couldn't see any positive side to this, but perhaps Jane was right. Perhaps the prince would be kind and soothe my broken heart eventually. Ned Stark point of view outside Winterfell bunting with Robert. As we left Winterfell, all I could think was how Robert broke Sansa's betrothal and how he had put me in a political whirlwind of like he would say shit. The Mormont invited in my household that day left with their soldiers without saying a word, and so did the Ironborn. They took it as an insult. Robert said to let them go and to not worry, that he would call for the kid to bend the knee, like he should have done after taking control of the Iron Islands. For fuck's sake, Ned, stop with that face, Robert grumbled. I broke my word. You made me break my word. I growled. It's not like it's the first time, or the bastard was an honorable action, Robert growled back. The brat will understand or his head will roll. Simple as that, Ned. Our families need to be together. I couldn't be with Lyanna. I won't let my son suffer the same fate. If only you knew who really was the bastard as you called it, you would have my head, Robert. I still don't like it. The lad was nothing but honorable and I broke his trust and possibly my relationships with his family. He alone made the fucking North better, and with this shit you pulled I might have fucked that. Fuck the kid. If he brings your boy problems I'll smash his head myself, so stop crying, Ned, Robert laughed. I eyed him. Maybe in the past that promise would have had some weight. Now he was the one with weight, not his words. I might be fat, but I still can swing my hammer, Robert said as if reading my mind. I see the lad fight. You'd better lose some weight if you want to fight him, I chuckled drily. Ha ha ha, that's it, Ned. Lighten up, Robert laughed. Chapter 28. When Viserys said he wanted to proceed with the marriage immediately, I did not expect to be so literal. We spoke about our pseudo-alliance a week ago, and today was my wedding day. What a joy. I wasn't particularly thrilled with the idea. I guess I'm still hang-ups with the social spectrums of my first world. There is something about marrying so young, and marrying without any kind of love that makes it feel devoid of anything. But I suppose it was a long time coming, though I originally expected to be marrying Sansa. After all, while I didn't love her I was fond of her, but in the end it appears that wasn't meant to happen. Now here I was getting ready for my big day. Normally marriage customs in this world vary considerably between the lands, cultures, and major faiths. Considering I was from the north, but Daenerys was from the south, and taking note that I was now the Lord of the Iron Islands, it kinda left me with problems to pick the ceremony style. For a South-style wedding I would need the presence of particular sacred witnesses, aka the Septon, mostly because the faith of the Seven was the major religious cult in the South. For a North-style wedding I would need to marry in front of a heart tree to pay respect to the old gods. Now for an Iron-style wedding I would need a priest or priestess to pay our respects to the drowned god while we said our vows. What all these things have in common is that the wedding is followed by a feast, where the bride and groom, aka me, eat, drink and dance with everyone. Afterwards comes the tricky part. The bedding ceremony takes place, where the marriage is finally and absolutely consummated, or like some say, babies are produced to ensure the family line. So basically I was left with no other choice than to marry Daenerys in the Iron Way and bed her. But because we didn't have a priest that worshipped the drowned god, we had to get a red priest, the ones that worshipped the Lord of Light. Everything is ready, Illyrio said as I walked to seal my fate with a girl I only knew in books. Let this wedding start, I smiled as I followed him. The priestesses agreed to marry us according to our culture, but the blessing would be on the Lord of Light. The red priestess that we got assigned was like I expected, very similar to Melisandre, and I couldn't help but wonder, did she have the same magic powers the Red Witch had? Shaking the thoughts out of my head, I walked to my position, as I waited. Eventually, after a few seconds, Daenerys came with her brother, walking side by side, until she was in front of me. The priestess smiled as she started the ceremony. "Who comes before the God of Light this night?" Viserys replied, "Daenerys, of the House Targaryen, comes here to be wed." A woman grown, true-born and noble. She comes to beg the blessing of the gods. Who comes to claim her? This was my cue, so I took a step forward and said, "Ronard of House Mormont, Lord of the Bear and Iron Islands." "Who gives her?" Viserys replied as he stepped off the scene, "Viserys of the House Targaryen, who is her brother and protector." "Yeah, sure, like you have done such a good job at protecting her." The priestess smiled as she began, "We are gathered here today in the sight of God of Light and men to bear witness to the joyous occasion that is marriage between Lady Daenerys and Lord Ronard. This was it. After today my vows I would have an entirely new responsibility, an entirely new mission, there would be no going back, I would have to take the throne." The priestess added, snapping me out my reverie, "Lady Daenerys, do you take this man?" Daenerys hesitated for a second, and I didn't blame her, she hardly knew me, but after a second of silence she said, "I take this man." The priestess then turned her ruby-colored eyes to me and asked, "Lord Ronard, do you take this woman?" This was the moment of truth, the moment when I officially entered the game. "I take this woman." Daenerys and I joined hands, as the priestess tied our hands together with a red ribbon as she said, "In the sight of the Lord of Light, I hereby seal these two souls, binding them as one, for eternity." After that the priestess instructed us to look upon one another and say the words, "Our vows." At this point, I was staring at Daenerys' purple eyes as she stared into mine, facing each other as we recited the following vow in unison, "I am his/hers and she/he is mine from this day until the end of my days, we are one." After a second of silence, we joined our souls, our destinies with a kiss, sealing our fate with fire and ice. The party started with all the invited people dancing, drinking and eating. I didn't know any of them except for my men, who were enjoying the feast to its fullest. Every now and then, someone would come and present me or my wife a gift. Illyrio gave Daenerys a beautiful chest with extremely expensive jewelry. Viserys gave her sister a silver-colored mare. That put me into alert mode, considering Drogo was the one to give that to her. Did he contact the call? How else did he acquire such horse? I had no men to fight 40,000 Dothraki. Were they here? After a second of consideration I decided to ignore the obvious red flag for now, considering that the Dothraki were many things and had many skills, but subtlety was definitely not on their list, so if I didn't see them, it's because they weren't here. As people continued to come and go, one among them caught my attention. He was looking at me with regret. It was someone I haven't seen in 5 years. Jorah Mormont. Anger I didn't know I had saved up against him was suddenly quite tangible. I wanted to kick him, beat him up, frankly I wanted to break him. But not today, I had other problems today. "So, wife?" I chuckled. Daenerys turned her beautiful purple eyes to me and said, "Yes. I know we are both in the unknown here, I hardly know you, and you hardly know me, but we can try to get to know each other?" I offered. This was bound to be harder for her than it was for me, by a big margin. Daenerys gave me a look that said she didn't expect me to be so human as she said, "That would be nice." The party continued with Daenerys considerably less scared than she was before, with the anticipation of how or who was I as a person. She certainly was feeling better, still full of doubt, but at least now she didn't look like she was going to die at any given moment. I, for the other hand, was showing a completely different face to what I actually felt. I was smiling on the outside, but inside my inner mini Ronards were having a mental breakdown. Any time now I would have to bed her, and yes, we were around the same age, and for me it was bad, but frankly at this point it wasn't so much that she was younger, it was that I didn't want to hurt her, to do something that would scar her. Bedding ceremony. My men shouted, and they really should thank God. I didn't have heat vision as a power or they would be long gone. It didn't take much to make everyone start their chant, as they pushed us gently into the room. All I could think or process inside my mind as the door to our room drew closer was, fuck. Chapter 29. And so wedding night started, the big point changer in my story, where I had to accept my new life as it was with all its ups and downs. I can't keep running from things that don't match my understanding of my past loss. I was whether I liked it or not in a new world, and there were things that were expected of me. This of course would have been easier if it wasn't because my ravens had warmed the bed for me, filling it with what they called soft feathers, as they whispered in my mind several mating rituals, to ensure, let's forget it. Of course I ignored them. All I could do was accept my unavoidable destiny, so with that in mind I decided to get to know Daenerys as I could before we consummated our marriage, but getting to know someone in less than 10 minutes was impossible to say the least. For her I was stranger, for me she was someone I read about. We were basically in the same position, in the unknown, but for her it was more difficult. Her brother practically sold her for an army. Would she end up as mad as she did on the TV series? Or would my presence in this world prevent such development? It will hurt, I sighed. I had experience with women in my past life, but I never made love to a virgin. All I knew was what I have heard or read about. I will be as gentle as I can. Daenerys shifted uncomfortably, not knowing what to say. She had yet to give me consent, and no matter what I was not going to take that step without consent. I won't do anything if you are not comfortable, I smiled, trying to sound as soothing as possible. I know that I'm a stranger for you, and frankly it's not easy. Daenerys looked at me for a second before she smiled. No. I want to do this. And our marriage started with a kiss. I knew warming the bed and making it softer with our feather was the best idea. Hooray! Ravens for the win! I don't know how many hours we were in our room, consummating our marriage, but time started to feel loose of meaning. I was in the bed, looking at my wife, as she eyed with curiosity the dragon eggs that I bought, that were originally intended for her. I always wanted to see a dragon, Daenerys smiled. Life might surprise you, life might. One day you might, who knows? Daenerys looked at me as she put the egg back in the box. That sounds like a dream. And often dreams come true, I chuckled, as my wife went to bed with me, resting her head on my bare chest. I dozed off into sleep as I brushed my wife's hair with my fingers. Underneath us were our blood-stained covered sheets, that marked me as her first and last man, because unlike Drogo, I was not going to die and leave her alone. I took a vow to keep her safe, and that I would leave long enough to sit in the Iron Throne and rule it all. I woke up next morning with Daenerys cuddling close to me, her naked body touching me ever so gently. My wife, the future mother of my children, I was not stupid to think I loved her already, but one day I would, and one day she would love me. I carefully got out of bed, making sure to not wake up my possibly sore wife. Once I was out of the bed I started putting on my clothes, getting ready to face the new problems ahead of me. Once I was fully dressed I got out of the room, being equally careful to not wake her up with a sudden noise or something. I then proceeded to walk to meet with Viserys, and discuss our plans. He would have to die, but the how and when was the thing. So you finally come out. It is unwise to leave you king waiting, Viserys said with a somewhat angry attitude, as he stood there with a smug demeanor on his face. I stared at him for a second, wondering if cutting his head would improve his attitude, but for now I had to wait for the right moment. But regardless of that, I wasn't going to let this pretentious bastard tell me what to do. Get used to it, I practically growled in response, daring him to take that obviously borrowed sword out. Viserys ignored my comment as he asked, "Where's my sister?" "Sleeping," I informed him. "Go and wake her up." Viserys turned her attention to a maid who nodded. But before the maid was able to leave I blocked her path. "She's sleeping, and she will remain sleeping." "I want her here," Viserys hissed. "And I want to leave my wife sleeping," I growled. "Who the fuck he thinks he is?" "She is my wife, and is my responsibility now. That means I get to decide things like this, so don't test me, unless you want one to try true to spare." I left the room, leaving a threat floating in the air. Daenerys was mine now. Mess with her and I'll cut you pretty head off. Viserys was visibly shocked as I left, and his hand moved towards his sword but didn't do much more than that. You're a Mormont point of view. In accordance with my deal with Varys, I came to pledge loyalty to the Targaryens. What I didn't expect was to find my son marrying Daenerys. He was so different from what I remembered. He had grown so much without me. He had fought 2 wars, and won. He was a man. Maybe he never needed me. "Yora!" Viserys shouted, entering my room. "Yes, my king?" I inquired, not knowing why he was so angry. "You are my loyal subject, right?" Viserys inquired angrily. I nodded in response. "I am your majesty." "Then, if I ordered you to kill your son, should I need it? Would you do it?" Viserys inquired, grinning like a madman. I would not. I have hurt my son enough already, but I had to play the part, and it's not like I could beat him. Something about my son, something about his glare at me yesterday made me feel a beast was hunting me. I would, your majesty. Good, I might need it, if he keeps disrespecting his superiors. Who does he think he is, speaking like that to a king, speaking like that to a dragon? Viserys hissed in anger. Unbeknownst to them, an incredibly wise raven was listening to their conversation. HRMM. To inform the great Cornbringer of this I have. After his mating I must, yes, the dark side of the corn I feel growing is. Back to Ronald Mormont point of view. I entered my room, a couple of hours after my disgusting conversation with the entitled king wannabe piece of shit. Daenerys was currently brushing up her morning hair as I entered, her beautiful long silver hair barely covering her tits. You didn't wake me up, Daenerys said, but the tone was more of a question than a statement. You looked so peaceful sleeping, so I thought you deserved a good long rest. I nodded as I walked into the bathroom, feeling Daenerys looking at me from behind, her eyes drifting slowly into my ass. So you finally found the best ass is Westeros. I chuckled as she blushed, looking away. Hey, you can look and touch, or bite, is yours after all. I might, Daenerys giggled, surprisingly teasing me back. Ha, I chuckled. After having breakfast with my wife, I started to machinate the best path to the Iron Throne. With or without me, Westeros would go into war. I knew that much. King Robert would die, and soon after Ned Stark will see the fruits of his idiocy. If I started my campaign for the throne now, I would make myself the sole target, and while I was somewhat confident in myself, it would be a suicide. But if I waited for them to start their own wars, it would be easy for me to dismantle them. A broken kingdom is easier to defeat. Not to count, I also had Daenerys by my side, and she probably was the only one able to hatch my dragon eggs. As I was deep in thought, a raven flew into my lap. HRMM. Bad news I bring, plotting the fake dragon is, HRRM. Take care of him we must. YRSS. Raven Yoda was back. Good thing Disney doesn't have interdimensional lawyers, so the entitled gecko is plotting. What an unexpected development, and by unexpected I mean I totally knew it would happen. Raven Yoda, Rhoda? Took a step forward. HRMM. At your call, the corn order is, Cornbringer. YRSS. Very well, I chuckled, and how could I not? Hey, do you think you can fly with a robe? I kinda want to dress you up with a small Yeti robe. Chapter 30. I took a couple of days where I completely ignored the King of Nothing, letting him know he wasn't my first priority and that I would come to him when I decided to, and only then. I had also instructed my man, should he threaten Daenerys or hit her in any way, to kill him. With that bullshit about waking up the dragon, she was my wife now, and I would be damned if I let her brother or anyone for that matter hurt her. I had more important things to do anyways than to indulge the idiot, and I didn't have time to lose with his idiotic plans and ideas. I had to first take control over Essos and their forces, and only then it would be plausible to conquest Westeros. So here I was sitting while looking at a map, wondering where to start my mission. What are you doing? Daenerys asked as she approached me, looking at the map. Trying to see where is the best place to start, I answered. Where to start getting the throne back? Daenerys asked as she sat on my lap, surprising me. I didn't expect her to sit on my lap. It wasn't unwelcome, but it was unexpected. Then again, she warmed up to Khal Drogo quite fast. Not exactly, we need more men to do that, so I'm seeing where to get them, I explained to her, without telling her about my plans of conquering Essos. Conquering Essos would be considerably harder than anything I have done so far, but if I did it, conquering Westeros would be technically speaking easy. Then again, in war and love anything is possible. I might be the strongest man in the world, but that alone doesn't win wars. So you want to get more men, maybe some Unsullied? Or you plan to recruit some Dothraki? Daenerys added understanding to some degree of the underlining of my plan. That's the plan, for getting that old throne back. It won't be easy, but I will certainly do it, I nodded. I see, I don't think Viserys will like it, Daenerys added, unsure. He wants the throne now. I started to chuckle, until eventually, I was full on laughing. If he wants the throne immediately, he is more than welcome to go alone to King's Landing and slay his way to the throne. He's your king. Daenerys tried to defend his brother but was amused at my comment. If I am to kneel, it will be in bed, going down on my wife. I chuckled, making a dirty joke to change the subject. Before the moment I married you I decided not to kneel anymore, I decided to stop bending for others. I am the king of the Iron and Bear Islands, and that makes you a queen. Don't forget it, because I won't. With that, I left Daenerys alone to process what I told her. After leaving Daenerys, I went to talk with Illyrio. He was the one that knew how to contact the Dothraki. It would certainly be helpful if he guided me to one of them or someone that knew their language to learn it. Son, someone behind me said, putting a hand on my shoulder, making me stop. Remove your hand out my shoulder. Before I remove the hand out your body, I said with a cold tone. I cut my father off by bending his arm in a swift motion, throwing him into the wall, breaking the arm he used to touch me. Don't ever touch me again, I rather die. The feeling is repulsive. I gave him a glare that was so devoid of any good emotion all he could stare in disbelief. And by the way, if you get close to my wife, I will show you there are destinies worse than death, and that's a promise I can deliver. I couldn't stomach that man, but I also wasn't going to be the one to kill my own father, whether the man deserved for what he had done or not. As I walked towards Illyrio's solar, I heard him and the prince having a conversation. The funny thing about a super body is that every sense is enhanced. He is not doing what he promised. Viserys practically shouted, "We should be marching to King's Landing. I should have my crown by now." He is trustworthy, at least my sources say so. Perhaps he is planning for your victory, my king, Illyrio offered. I don't care, he is taking too long. We'll start over with the original plan. I'll marry Daenerys to those savages and get 10,000 soldiers. We will kill that insolent fool and give his father his lands, who would then work for me, is frankly the best plan. I will get more men, and undying loyalty. I'm a genius, as expected of the future king of the Seven Kingdoms. By this point, I had managed to sneak into the room, and had managed to serve a cup of wine. Well, that's a mighty good plan, but who's going to kill me? My question made both turn their necks so fast that they almost broke them. You? I pointed at Viserys. Hardly. I don't even take my own sloppy seconds with you. How dare you? Viserys hissed. The Unsullied protecting the castle? I hummed. They at least know how to fight, but hardly a challenge. I am your king. Viserys shouted. Or maybe you plan to have Illyrio fight me? I said, turning my gaze to the trembling fat man. Don't think so. Look at him, he is losing weight by just looking at me. I would never attack a guess. Illyrio offered, still trembling. Or maybe you would send my father. I chuckled. Please tell me is my father. You will not. Viserys started to shout, but I dashed towards him and slapped him, putting his entitled ass on the floor. I am king. I bow to no one, I said, holding my sword to my side. Consider this the end of our alliance, not that it ever started, out of courtesy for giving me such a wonderful wife, and with that claim to the throne, I will talk with my wife about your fate, plotting to sell my wife like a whore and get me killed. Frankly, it's so sad and yet poetic. You will die in the same manner you originally did, for the same reason. You can't wait. At least this time he was right. I was never going to give him the crown. I grabbed Viserys by his shirt, not before knocking him down, as I dragged him across the floor, not before giving the old fat man a warning. I hope you don't try anything stupid, or you will find how terrifying I can be, Illyrio. So don't fuck with me, buddy, or I'll kick your ass so hard you'll have to unbutton your collar to shit. With that done, I proceeded to get out with an unconscious on my back, Viserys being dragged across the floor like a sack of shit. As I walked down the hallway to my room, while I wanted to kill Viserys, I didn't want an angry wife for the rest of my life, so I would discuss with her his punishment, but either way, he wasn't in the game any longer. Daenerys would either condemn him to his death like she did on the original timeline or ask for a lesser punishment like imprisonment. Either way, he would not see the light of day again. Illyrio point of view. The eyes of that kid, he can't be human. I saw nothing but death and despair if I ever wronged him. I was a mercenary. I know of fear, I know of monsters, and yet this kid makes all my past terrors look childish. Varys, what in the name of the gods you were thinking? We can't tame this monster, I muttered, as I remembered what Varys said before he left. Perhaps only the dragon can tame this mighty bear, Varys chuckled. He never met Viserys. No, he meant Daenerys. He plans to have that shy girl keep that monster in check. What an utterly ridiculous plan. Have you lost your touch, Varys? Chapter 31. Daenerys was not exactly happy when I entered our room dragging Viserys alongside me, and it was to be expected. She had no idea what had just happened. Why is my brother in that state? Daenerys inquired, pointing at her brother on the floor with an accusatory look on her face. I sighed, trying to word out what had just happened. It wasn't easy to find the right words to basically say, your brother wanted to kill me and whore you out to a Dothraki horde to get some men. But oftentimes times is best to go with the harsh reality of the situation, that can be easily explained. I went into detail how Viserys was plotting to get me killed and have my father take my throne, and now then he would marry her to savages just to gather even more men. I can't believe you would do such a thing, Daenerys said in disbelief, eyes full of tears. I sighed as I shrugged my shoulders. You can ask Illyrio, he can fact-check. Daenerys shook her head off. No, I believe you. Well, that was frankly easier than I originally thought it would. I came here so you can decide his punishment. I wanted her to be the one to select his fate. If I did it, there was a big chance she would resent me for it, but if she did, it was a totally different story. Daenerys eyed me for a second, possibly weighing the options. It was either death or imprisonment. After a few seconds where she was walking around the room trying to decide, she finally said, I know death is the most acceptable punishment, but whether he was good or not, he kept me safe all this time. I want to imprison him. While it wasn't the result I had desired from this outcome, it was still good. Nonetheless, it was a matter of time before he did something stupid and forced my sword down his neck. I'm not going to lie, I will cherish that moment with all my heart. Very well, but if he takes a wrong step, I will kill him. I nodded as I approached her, grabbing in a tight embrace by her hips. You are my wife, and whether we love each other or not, is my duty to keep you safe. Daenerys nodded in understanding as I left the room with the sack of shit. I mean the king on my back. It took roughly 2 hours for Viserys to wake up, and his expression finding himself on one of the cells in my ship was priceless, unique, formidable. It almost made him still being alive worth it. Seriously, seeing his smug facade turned into one of total and absolute despair was a delicacy. So you finally rise, oh mighty dragon, I mocked, getting a hateful glare from him. MHHQG. Viserys tried to say something, but his mouth was covered with homemade cloth gag, and some might wonder what a homemade cloth gag is. Well, it's a piece of used underwear from the dirtiest man under men, that was utilized for this purpose. I hope you like the flavor. Petro hasn't taken a bath or changed underwear for the last 4 months, I laughed, seeing how Viserys started to join the dots on his head, to the point he was almost throwing up. Ha, Petro laughed in the back. Don't get all fancy on me, Viserys, I chuckled. After all, your life in prison will be quite harsh and disgusting. Petro will take a bath, and that will be your drink water unless you rather drink other body fluids. Viserys' eyes widened in shock, fear rushing through his very core. I promised Daenerys I would keep you alive, I smiled, and I know torturing physically will not make her happy, but oh boy, physiological torture is quite better, once you break a man. But not physically, but mentally he can't never be mended back together again. Viserys started to try and talk again, but I cut him off. You know, I can understand the general idea of you trying to kill me. I won't let you, but heck, I can even respect you for it. I mean, it takes balls to try that knowing you will ultimately fail, but to hurt your own blood, that is simply despicable. I left, giving my men instructions to keep him alive. He, unfortunately, was loved to some degree by his sister, my wife. After leaving Viserys to suffer, I went back to Illyrio Castle, to discuss a meeting with the Dothraki, and possibly getting someone that could teach me their language. I needed to speak their tongue for my plan to work. This is one of the books I have in Dothraki culture, and more. Illyrio offered, somewhat fearful what had happened earlier. Thanks, I waved him off as I started to read. The Dothraki people are a culture of nomadic warriors and Essos who range across the vast grasslands of the Dothraki Sea in hordes known as Khalasars. People of the Seven Kingdoms and the Free Cities also refer to the Dothraki as horse lords. The Dothraki live in hordes called Khalasars. Their chieftains are called Khals, while the wife of a Khal is known as a Khaleesi. The heir of a Khal is named the Khalaka. A KO is one of the Khal's commanders within a horde. According to a semi-canon source, a Khas consists of the personal guard of important individuals, such as a Khaleesi or a KO. Blood Riders fulfill the roles of guards, brothers, shadows, and friends to the Khal in ways that run deeper than the oath of the King's Guard to the King on the Iron Throne. The Khal and his Blood Riders commonly refer to each other as blood of my blood. Who would have thought they had such a complicated ruling system? For savages they have quite the operational, political system. I chuckled as I read. Unfortunately, the book didn't have anything useful their language so far, and the book had even less their migration patterns because these were pretty random, so to hunt them all down would take quite a while. I had to find an interpreter, someone that wasn't my father. I knew he knew how to speak their language, but the idea of asking him for help was repulsive of its own. So I continued reading. The Dothraki language is considered a rough, harsh language by Westerosi standards. They use descriptive names, for example, Rishandali, meaning the land of the Undols, for Westeros, Shirak-Chia, which literally means bleeding star, used to describe the red comet, or the term milk men for the Carthene, pointing towards their paleness. Again, nothing but general, and I mean very general descriptions about their culture and language. As I continued reading the book, trying to find anything useful, Daenerys entered the library with a quite provocative dress. "Is late, come to bed with me," Daenerys was trying to seduce me? I mean, it's not bad. I'm her husband, but frankly, I didn't expect her to try and sleep with me after I bitch-slapped and imprisoned her sister. I mean brother. She was wearing a Carthene dress that I had yet to figure out where or how she acquired it, but to be honest, I didn't care. The sight was quite nice to behold. Now that you said it, I kind of feel like going to bed, I chuckled as I approached her, running my fingers through her hair down to her uncovered tit. If I didn't know any better, I would say you were trying to seduce me. Daenerys smiled as she took a step forward, kissing me quite passionately, and as our lips separated whispered, "I am, my king." Well, I don't know what kind of evil and malevolent plot she's cooking, and I don't care if these are her plots. She can sign me up for a couple of them. In the end, I will win, and we'll have a great time along the way. This marks the end of Part 5 of the story Game of Thrones, The Prideful One. Thank you for listening. Please like the video and hit the subscribe button to listen more. Hit the bell icon to get notified of all the new content uploaded to the channel ASAP.